Thank you. Hello, appreciate your time. My name is Angus Murray. I have an Australian accent, but obviously Scotland was somewhere in the background. I'm having a conversation with you today about a company that we have that's listed on EURONEXT, so the European Stock Exchange. It's traded in pound sterling and it's available to be able to purchase via the platforms such as AJ Bell. This project is really about bringing this set of tunnels to life, which are in central London. So these tunnels already exist. They were built by the British to defend Britain and Europe against Nazi Germany. And they sit underneath the Central Line in central London. So the Central Line is here, and these tunnels run below the Central Line. They're very large. This is an image drawn to scale of the size of the tunnels underneath London, and they are over a mile long in distance. So we won't be building anything, if you can imagine what that is. You can have a look at this. We won't be building anything because you're not allowed to touch the tunnels of this size, and also to be very much far too expensive. So to rebuild these tunnels today would cost about just over £1 billion. We have purchasing them from British Telecom. And it's part of us being able to turn this asset back into a history and heritage and also a cultural experience. So it's a tourist attraction. And within that tourist attraction, it is therefore comparable to Madame Tussauds in London or to the London Eye. And by comparable, I mean, if you look at the number of people that the London Eye gets, 3.8 million people at a certain ticket price, it'll give you a certain level of profitability. If you look at Madame Tussauds, 2.5 million people at a different ticket price, but similar, then you end up with the same type of broad business model. And each of those, therefore, seem to have a valuation somewhere in the range of maybe 600 million to 900 million pounds. That's based upon what the profitability of those operations are. Both of those two other operations are almost full in terms of capacity, whereas we can start once we open it to the public, and we can have 3 million people a year. The capacity is 3 million people. Like, how many people can we fit in this room? We can fit 3 million, but we're operating with numbers that are slightly below that. So this presentation is therefore just to introduce this to you. The company, as I said, has listed about 3 months ago on EURONEXT. We are therefore educating people with regard to the project, and we are actually asking investors to come down to have a look at the tunnel so they have a full understanding themselves. We have some investors coming down next Wednesday, and then we have investors coming down again in November and in December. So if you happen to be in London, you can easily just log on to our website, and I'll show that to you in a moment, and then we reserve you a spot to come down. So the idea on this particular set of tunnels is to recreate and tell the history that lies behind them, and also introduce a cultural experience, a bit like our Talia Luminaire in France or Team Labs in Tokyo. And then the last section, which I'll show you, is it does have or will have the deepest licensed bar in the world in a metropolitan city. So that is in this set of tunnels, and that bar was originally there. It's not like we are putting a bar in because we want to. It was originally there when it was owned by the post office. So this is an idea of what we would try and recreate, and that is the story of the London Blitz. And obviously we know that 43,000 civilians died during that time, and it's being able to tell the story of that along with some other stories, which I'll show you in a moment. So in summary, what we are looking at here is the last major history and heritage cultural tourist attraction that can ever be opened in London. It's not because you couldn't build one, but if you're building one, it won't have the history and heritage. There's just no more room left, and there is no other asset of this size. These tunnels themselves are the largest set of tunnels built for people in the world. So if you think about when you walk out of this hotel into the foyer, that type of space, that's how big these tunnels are. And so they're the largest set of tunnels built for people in the world. Why is that? Because, as we know, London was the only city, major city, that needed to defend itself during the London Blitz, which obviously was the Battle of Britain and the London Blitz at the broad and same time. And London as a city needed to defend itself and ultimately defending Europe against what Germany was doing. Germany overtook the whole of Europe very quickly, so nothing needed to be built there. And America, of course, didn't join the war until Pearl Harbor. So the other part of history, which I'll briefly go through, is just to indicate when Ian Fleming was the naval liaison officer to the Special Operations Executive, he was down in these tunnels. That's a bit amusing because this is actually Q Branch from James Bond. So when we watch that James Bond movie on Christmas Day and we look at Q Branch, this is truly the location of Q Branch from James Bond. And then we already have full planning approval. The City of London and Camden Council have given full planning approval for this as a project to bring up to 3 million people. And as a business model, it's pretty simple. How many people do you think will visit? At what ticket price? Take away your costs, and that's the revenue that you can ultimately get relative to profitability. And within that, where is it located? Well, it's located in central London, directly below Chancery Lane Tube Station. So these are the tunnels themselves. When we open up the ground, below Chancery Lane Tube Station, Holborn is over here, the City of London is down here, the river is here, the British Museum is there, and we're a 13-minute walk from Covent Garden. Important because there are 44 million people who go to Covent Garden every year. In other words, you are in the centre for a lot of tourism being very close to the area. Again, looking at the tunnels, which is that model, but underneath the ground. One of the lucky parts to it is because the tunnels were built 1940 to 42 and then expanded from 1950 to 52, we ended up having construction shafts to the surface. Because of those construction shafts, you get fire and safety approval for adequate evacuation. If we didn't have that, we would never have got approval to be able to get planning consent to bring people down. And that is the location of the tunnels, putting it in reference for London. So we are a 20-minute walk from the Tate Modern or the British Museum. We are a 13-minute walk from Covent Garden. We are in a wonderful location from transport and where tourism is today. And that's obviously what you want. Does London have a lot of people? Yes. Is this in central London? Yes. Is it something interesting to do? Potentially, at least if that's our story that people can look at. So full planning approval given by the City of London, comment by their chairman, full approval given by Camden Council, and some comments in the press release that Camden Council were given. And then this is an image of what the smaller tunnel looks like. It's a little less, not as wide as this room, but obviously it goes up above it. So above me, for example, there'd be another 3 metres. And these are 400 metres long each, and there are 2 of them. So the majority of that equipment, the main generator there will be kept, the other parts will be removed. So it really has that history and heritage behind it. Why is that generator there? It was there to power the telecommunications exchange, which was built 1950 to 52. It wasn't there for the war. In the war, it was just meant to be full of beds for people to basically come into the tube line and then down into the effectively safety to get away from the bombings of London. And then these are the larger spaces. These are as big as the Eurostar tunnel. You can drive 3 double-decker buses down this side by side. It's just to give a reference of size. And these were all built by hand by the British within a period of 18 months and then extended out. And this asset, we had approval to buy it from the Secretary of State in the United Kingdom, and the asset has been sold to bring it back alive for the benefit, I hope, of London, but also the United Kingdom. So the history is pretty much broken up into the Second World War, which is the London Blitz, the Special Operations Executive, branch of MI6 started by Winston Churchill, Ian Fleming's Association for Q Branch. They were the reserve war room to the cabinet war rooms in case they got bombed during that time. And then as a telecommunications exchange, it connected the White House and the Kremlin during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So that's one story. The second story, because the tunnels are so large, is a cultural and art experience about having the fun of going into tunnels, but also then having culture and art down inside of those tunnels. And then the last part is the deepest licensed bar, and that being open. But it's also meant to not just be a bar to go out from 7 p.m. till 1 a.m., but it's meant to be an experience you can go at any point in time to relate to what's going on down in that area. So this is an image of what it would look like for the London Blitz. This is an image of what we could be for the Special Operations Executive. This is not our tunnels, but this is another set of tunnels, but ours look almost identical to this that they use in a James Bond movie, so there's obviously the association for that. On the cultural side, you could clearly have this type of experience recreated, which is not particularly difficult, and or this type of experience. In other words, you're combining history and heritage with art and culture, so that if people go to this area, it's not like, am I going to the London tunnels? It's, am I going to go to the London tunnels and see the history and heritage, or am I going to see the cultural side? And then the last part is the original bar that was down there that would be renovated and turned into something new. So we're not building anything new, we're really renovating what is already there. So if that attraction is interesting and appealing, because it's the only one of its sort in the world, it's the only one that people can go into, therefore there's nothing else like it in the world, and it's associated with London from a history and heritage point of view, the next question you have to ask ourselves, or we would ask, is London a popular city? And there's no question that London is the most powerful Western city in the world. It's not the most visited city in the world. You might argue that either Bangkok or Hong Kong or Istanbul are, but it is certainly the most powerful Western city in the world. So plus or minus 20 million tourists a year, 30 million people within 1 hour, 50 million people of the universe. That is going to keep changing. We know how successful the London Eye became, and it started now 24 years ago, and nothing new has really come along to match it in that capacity. So London, definitely a powerful city with lots of people. If you look in the media, we've gathered a lot of attention from it. I guess people are interested in tunnels and the nuance of that and going in and experiencing it. And we also then know what the ticket prices are. So these are the broad costs of going and visiting these attractions in London. So it's a relatively simple business model, as I said. If you think we could get 3 million, slightly less people a year, and you multiply it by the ticket price and perhaps buying a ticket to go to the bar, i.e. you buy 10, 12 pounds, you get a free cocktail. Cocktail costs you £2 to make. You can see how you get a revenue that comes from that. So you're talking about a business that the plus or minus is therefore going to be able to make probably a revenue approaching 80, 90 million once we've got it up and full in capacity. And therefore, if you take out your costs, you can end up with what the profitability would be. And that's why we would indicate that it's probably comparable to, should be, to the London Eye and Madame Tussauds. So as I said, the business model is a rather simple one. And we're not building anything, it is there, and there's nothing else to compete with it. So it's effectively in its own monopoly. By that, or add to the monopolistic attribute, can other things be built? Yes, but not with the history and heritage embedded in them. You're not going to be able to recreate Q Branch that is actually Q Branch, and you're not going to be able to recreate tunnels where you go 30 metres below London. So these were 3 projects which London was assessing as to whether they had approved, and all of them got knocked back on planning for a variety of different reasons. In other words, it is very difficult to get planning approval. Of course, we weren't building anything new, and nobody even knew what we had was there. So getting planning, although a process, we were able to achieve that planning approval. An independent board of directors, which all of you would expect of any publicly listed company on a regulated exchange, being EURONEXT. We listed on EURONEXT. Obviously from AJ Bell, the stock is available to be bought, and it's just traded in pound sterling, sits on the exchange today. If you go onto our website, londontunnels.com, the londontunnels.com, you will see that investor visits little button. And if you press on that and just put in your details, which is that one, then we will, if you come to London, we will invite you to come down to have a look at the tunnel so that you can appreciate it. In other words, it's very hard to describe quite what I'm talking about from the visuals, and it is significantly more impressive than I can really describe. And I don't mean that from a sales angle, I mean that from a sincerity. Each time I go down, it does amaze me that the British were able to build this by hand in such a short period of time for the defence of the country and Europe. So anyway, that's there, and we asked whether you're a shareholder because we just prioritise shareholders in terms of people coming down and to have a visit. So the conclusion on that presentation is I think what we have is the last remaining large-scale history and heritage tourist attraction that can ever be opened in London. We have a vast number of people coming to London, and that is only going to continue to increase. And that tourism is part of what the government, I imagine, will continue to try and foster, because it's a good way of generating income, which generates about 10% of the GDP for the United Kingdom. And obviously I can see that here today in terms of tourism coming about and the benefits that come from that. So what I think we have is a very, very unique asset, not just in London, but from a global aspect. It has an amazing history in itself, why you'd want to go and learn about that history. We can add things to it. It's below the central line, and therefore it's its own experience. The management team behind it, I think, is competent. It is, of course, going to more than likely appoint an operator, because you want to introduce an experienced operator in that area. And also then it surrounds itself with the leading architects. So the architectural firm is Wilkinson Eyre, which did the Battersea Power Station in London. And I think those counterparties are the right type of counterparties to be involved with. And that's where we started the project 4 years ago. We've committed to raising money, which we're doing at the moment. So we're listing. The share price came on at £2. It's trading at £2.18 or thereabouts. We listed on EURONEXT. Partly and mainly to give us access to the European capital markets. Although because we have some market makers here in the UK, you therefore fit onto the major platforms, being AJ Bell or HL or Interactive Investors. It sits as a platform. So, and that means we are regulated in the Netherlands by the regulator, which is rather similar to being listed on the London Stock Exchange and regulated by the FCA. And then the last part is just to indicate it's a very simple business model. It cannot be replaced, it cannot be stolen, it has no competition in terms of the fact that it's going to sit there. If we can make it appealing enough, then I think people will visit. We're weather independent and a few other things that come on to London which make it good. But I think that the inherent part is that this asset itself is of interest to people to visit. And we hope we can be respectful enough of the story of the embedded history to make it something that's very appealing. So if that's therefore of interest to you, by all means, please get in contact with us. If you, as I say, you come to London, we would welcome taking investors down first, but other people that are interested to see so that they can fully understand what we're trying to create. And that presentation, I think, is emailed out by AJ Bell, and the model you've seen. And if you've got any questions, I'll be more than welcome to answer those. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angus. Have we got any questions for Angus? We've got one just here, and then...
Hi, can you tell me, have you already raised the money for the renovations, or are you needing to raise more money for the renovations?
We've gone through stages, which is in our prospectus. We are at the moment continuing to raise money for what will be the ultimate purchase of the tunnels, and we've raised sufficient capital for that. We already had planning approval, and we had to bring the business to where it is. After that is done, the facility can operate as it is, having a walk around like it is today. But you're not going to get revenues of probably more than £9 million, because you're going to have a limited number of people within the bounds of what's there and having a look around. Still very interesting. I mean, if you consider that nobody from the public has ever been down there, it is interesting to a degree. But it will then take us we will go through a debt funding, which will be most likely a project bond, which is a dedicated instrument for this particular project, like you do on building a motorway if you're doing a toll road on it. And we'd need to raise about £140 million to bring it up. So you're not building anything new, but by the time you put in a new elevator shaft and brand new ventilation, you clear out what's there, you put in the displays, etc., probably in the end about £140 million. So to open it up in full capacity, you'd be looking 2028 when you go from maybe 100,000 people a year to sort of 2.6 million people a year.
Excellent. We had a question just here.
Hello. Yep, that was sort of going to be my question, because I think the Emirates Business and First Class Lounge at Glasgow Airport cost $3 million just to outfit an existing space. So I was interested in what the the total cost would be for this by the time the first paying customer went in?
So the first paying customer could come in relatively soon, but going in as it is at the moment to have a look around. And if you look, for example, at the Paris catacombs, so that's when Napoleon III wanted to develop Paris as he was, and he had to dig up all the bodies, basically, and push them all outside the city, which they did, and they put them into the old lime quarries. That is about a 1.5 kilometre walk. It's got you walk around and hear a little bit of audio about it, but you just basically walk around a bunch of neatly stacked up bones for about 1.5 kilometres. They get 550,000 visitors a year at about 30 euros, plus or minus. And there's nobody showing you around. You just walk around by yourself, come back up, and that's the display. So could we do that in its current format without spending a tremendous amount of money? Yes, you could do that. But would you like to develop it into the much larger scale of something that is much more representative of images such as this, etc., then that would take that amount of money. And that's when you lift the tourist numbers up to more like 2.6 million people a year.
We've got a question just here, and then we'll come to that.
How many people do you envisage being inside the tunnels at any one time?
You have about 6,000 square metres, so you'd be able to fit about 790, 840 people per hour inside of it relative to the lifts. So it's more an ambience of comfort. This density is too dense. If you look at a museum, for example, you normally have one person per 5 square metres, but if you can get that down to one person per 3 square metres, that's probably about right. But in essence, you want to be one person in about an area like this. So we've done that at about, call it averaging 800 people per hour.
And is there, I take it that there'll be an access point at one end and exit at the other end, or? People tend to like to arrive and leave at the same point. There are 2 entrances, but there's going to be a primary space. You also want to have people come to one destination, and you also want them to leave, partly because if they leave a bag or something that's up there, but you also want them to go through a shop. And so you want them to go through the shop like we do at airports, and you end up going into that particular area.
You mentioned an operator. So does an operator take on risk? Does an operator pay you rent? Do they pay you royalties for a visitor? What does an operator do? So
there are different models for operators, but that is correct. Some of them will take on the asset and they'll pay a rent for it and any excess money above that. Some you will have some type of minimum fee that they will get, and then you share the profits that come from that. There are 2 big operators in the United Kingdom. One is much bigger than the other. Merlin Entertainment is significantly bigger than the others. And you've got one up, for example, that does some stuff here called Continuum. I think they do your tunnels here in Edinburgh. They do Loch Ness, and they manage a series of ones more in the north of England. But Merlin is by far the dominant party to that, in part because they have Legoland, they have Madame Tussauds, they have the London Eye, and they have Shrek Adventures and a whole series of other ones that go with that.
And yes, gentleman over here.
Hi, that was a very interesting presentation. And during it, I just was wondering if this will be ready, say, in 2028. We have a younger population coming up that are going to be visiting this. And I'm just wondering, are you doing any partnerships with technology companies that could bring in a VR experience or augmented reality experience? And can you change and adapt to the different tastes and trends of a younger generation coming up?
Yeah, so the answer I would say is that you will design the screens and the format like this, which is just screens, this is obviously a CGI, or this is probably a better realisation, so that you can change the content on those screens relatively quickly. Yeah. So you could be in the Highlands, or you could be in Utah, or you could be in the Amazon rainforest. So you want to be able to do it. You want to put in place systems that can change relatively easily.
But yes, partnerships with technology companies would definitely be part of what we would aim to do. The history and heritage, I can understand. For example, some of my staff didn't know what the Cuban Missile Crisis was, so I had to go and make them watch a movie on it. But I think the idea is, and I was asked a question validly earlier in the week, don't you think that the London Blitz is not that well understood? And the answer is probably. That's probably true, and that's very wrong. I'm not to say that somebody should be educated in a certain way, but I'm pretty sure we should know the sacrifices that our great-grandparents and the men and women before us sacrificed to give us the very democratic rights we have today. And I think that telling that story is incredibly important. Why, though, would I go to this tunnel itself? Because I'd go to the tunnel. Hopefully what I put on is a really good show too. But if you are, so for example, we can walk inside these tunnels up to almost to where the entrance level is at Chancery Lane. Now, there's a 4-metre piece of concrete in between because they've blocked it off. But if we put a visual screen on one side on Chancery Lane and a visual screen on the other, it's quite cool. And I think it's that interactivity. I think that you have to make it very pro-Instagram. It has to be very Instagrammable. I personally think Instagram is a highly immoral company. I think it destroys the lives of people. But I do think that we can't ignore its popularity. And my son, 22, will almost choose a destination to go on holiday because he wants to bake it on Instagram, as sad as that is. So I think to answer your question is yes, that has to be interchangeable relatively inexpensively so it can keep up with the times. And if we can change the content and bring it about and make it Instagrammable, then I think that becomes its own self-fulfilling advertising program.
So would you envisage that the technology will be in place in 2028 to facilitate that, like 5G or Wi-Fi or whatever?
Oh, you'll have Wi-Fi down there and you'll have all of that because you want to be able to track people from a safety level anyway. I think that the advancements in technology are coming about, but if I could be slightly bold about it, I don't think there's much difference between the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 16. In other words, the major improvements we've had in touch screens and visual technology has already been in change. Could we enhance that? Sure. But I think that the main way of that visitor experience is about what was there. So would it be good if we were able to partner with the armed services and have some of their content from actually people and the way it worked when they found the V2 rocket launcher? Absolutely.
Sorry, just what's the market cap at the moment?
About £150 million.
And how much of that investment is from institutions?
I would say the predominance of that is from family offices and wealth managers. Oh. We are moving on to that stage with regard to referring it into institutions as an institutional investor. We're coming to that part now, and this is sort of the start of that conversation and then leads on to the institutions.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Excellent. Any more questions? Just got one here. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Sorry, hello there. Very interesting story. I'm just picking up on the previous question. It seems to me that to get to the visitor numbers that you're looking for this, everything here is going to have to be world class in terms of the technology and the audio visuals and the experience. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. And I think
answer?
I think that to be able to gather that investment is a process we'll go through. I think that the elements behind making a tourist attraction attractive, I think, is the broad number of people that are there already. So if we were to put a project like this further outside of London, I think it would be a lot more difficult than inside of London. Although, and I know it is Harry Potter, the making of Harry Potter is about an hour outside of London. It genuinely does get 2 million people a year, and it genuinely has just under 150 million in revenue there on the company's house. So it's clearly a very relatively simple thing. That is Harry Potter, I understand. So I think this is in central London, and I think that because it is the only thing of its type in the world, it gathers a lot of interest. And if you look at the media that we've had, that media in itself is showing you that people are interested in this type of thing. So I think the first part is, are there a number of people, and inherently would they be interested in going into a tunnel? Yes. If we then add on the expertise of world-class stuff today, then I think that's possible. Is that possible? Yes. I think that if you look at the way we are able to put screens together today, and we are able to create stories inside of spaces, we are a lot better at that today at a lot less cost than we may have been 10 years ago. And I think, you know, you take the Elon Musk's amazing spacecraft and the touchscreens that go up today versus what we had in the past. There's a huge leap forward in that technology. I mean, even this technology is in itself pretty advanced from where it is.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question expecting you to say yes, obviously, but even from the pictures you put up, I was intrigued by the one with the tunnel, the sort of war room tunnel, where you had the German bomber and the Spitfire and all that stuff. And presumably you'd have air raid warnings and lighting effects and all the rest of it that could give that a real wow factor.
And so this, I'm not at all being negative on myself, but this is not particularly advanced technology. So this will only be a fibre class Rutger 88 coming across. By a Spitfire, we won't have a real one. And you'll have the screens and a lot of the old footage that comes with it. In the bottom there, you'll have London as it stands. And so you'll have an image that's like that. We will then have a memorial for the men and women who lost their lives during that period of time. So you'll have a speaker, almost like all these silver lines along here, and those speakers are projecting the voices of the relatives of the people that tell their stories, along with the images of the people. The other one, which is not relatively difficult, is you can imagine a very large video game. So we're in a space like this and we have a video game, whether you're using your phone or some type of device to connect to it, so you can experience shooting down German aircraft as they come over London. Those things in the world of video games today are not particularly complicated today. How you implement them and how quickly you can get people to move through that is probably more complicated, i.e., are you creating a bottleneck? And I think that flow is very important.
Excellent. Great. I think that's all the time we have for questions, so really appreciate your time, Angus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.